Thank you, Ceann Comhairle. Ceann Comhairle, Fianna Fáil are the party that for its lifetime have credited itself in being the home providers for generations. The previous government issued guidelines that prevented housing development outside the M50. The Mahon Tribunal found that, in effect, the planning policy adopted by governments facilitated the practice of payment for zoning. Now, new planning policy is demanding effectively dezoning of large amounts of serviced lands in every rural town in Ireland and indeed within the M50. Taoiseach, should your government pursue this Stalinist policy? If it does, it will not achieve housing targets. Not alone that, but it will create an environment where the payment for planning permissions will return. Low-income families will be forced into ghettos, and everybody knows the social problems that will ensue. You may not be aware, Taoiseach, but up to 80% of lands in rural towns in Ireland will be effectively dezoned during the current development plan formation process. In Wexford Town alone, 600 acres of mostly serviced land will be effectively dezoned. Planners continuously say that commercial considerations aren't planning considerations. They clearly live in a parallel universe, Ceann Comhairle, as does the planning regulator. Ceann Comhairle, I'd ask the Taoiseach to confirm, in order to ensure that the government meets its housing targets, the following will not happen in the formation of county development plans across the country. 1, that no serviced lands for housing with existing planning permissions will be effectively dezoned. And 2, no tiered zonings will be applied to existing service-zoned lands such that planning departments of local authorities can arbitrarily decide what lands get planning permission and what lands don't. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Murphy. Taoiseach.
Yeah, first of all, I would say to the Deputy that one of the facts of the current situation in relation to housing is the enormous amount of land that is zoned, housing projects, planning permissions that have been, not just zoned, but planning permissions that have been granted but not acted on. So there's no shortage of zoned land in the country. There's no shortage of projects that have received planning permission. But the projects have not started, and there's a big issue there that needs to be dealt with from a housing provision perspective. And some on the building side say there's a viability issue. I think that needs to be worked out and examined. There's a broader policy in terms of spatial planning, in terms of developing brownfield sites, in terms of making sure that in cities and in towns that we get compact development so that we do utilise existing services and that we avoid overly suburban sprawl. And that's an important planning consideration. I think in many of our cities and towns we have schools with capacity. We have a range of services with capacity. And I think it makes sense to target those areas for additional housing or the refurbishment of existing buildings to provide for residential units. And it's interesting in terms of the URDF funding, that very substantial funding has been provided by government to enable government and to enable those areas to have the infrastructural investment to enable housing and apartment developments to take place within cities and within towns on a significant scale, and also significant investment in water infrastructure, which is vital and which has been a barrier to some construction projects, that would happen also. In respect of county development plans, we don't interfere in the decisions that the councillors themselves may take, or the council as a whole, taking advice from their officials, will take in respect of county development plans. Now, I do take your point that if land is good and if land is serviced, we don't want to take it out of commission either. because we do need to build as many houses as we possibly can to catch up, first of all, with the fact that COVID-19 has reduced a lot of capacity with the lockdown and the shutdown of construction. So we do need to build at least on average about 33,000 to 35,000 a year, as per the SRI reports, to deal with the housing crisis. And we're intent as a government to provide for social housing, but also to provide for affordable housing, and to give every support we can to young people to be in a position to buy their own homes and to realise what is a very legitimate aspiration. But I think there is another part of the equation that the Deputy has raised, which I said at the outset in my response. There is the issue of a hell of a lot of land out there that has received planning permission, but very little has happened, and that's a concern.
Murphy.
And so it should be a concern, Count Corley, because the reality is that the planning policies we have today mean that most of what's expected is not viable. And that's why developers aren't building. High densities have been pushed upon them. There is no viability in the development. Therefore, planning permissions have been granted and they won't be built. But I am glad to hear the Taoiseach confirm that there are issues with the policy, particularly dezoning serviced sites. It would make absolutely no sense, and Taoiseach, I hope you can appreciate that to do such would eventually result very quickly, not eventually, very quickly, driving up the price of the land that is left. If you remove almost 80% of the land that's owned in Wexford, on a anybody's normal thinking scale, do you believe that that's going to make the remaining lands cheaper? Because that is not the purpose it will serve. Dezoning serves to do one thing, put us back in a position where we're hosting another Mahon tribunal. It is utter, utter madness. And I'm going to ask you again, Taoiseach, to confirm that you will talk to the Minister and instruct the Minister to ensure that fully serviced lands with planning permission, which was extended during COVID, is not dezoned.
Thank you, Deputy. Taoiseach.
Well, the Minister is doing everything he possibly can in terms of the provision of housing. The Minister does not interfere in county development plans in terms of to that degree, and it's important that demarcation lines are there in terms of in terms of the actual county development plans themselves. Now, there is a question mark, though, that begs to be asked too. And there has been a lot of land zoned over the years, and to a certain. But the question needs to be asked: why hasn't that land? And I'm not so sure it's all just about viability. I don't think it's all just about viability.
Because government policy is
Stalinist.
Stalinist.
I don't think it. No, it's not.
Yes, it is.
No, it's not.
Yes, it is.
There's people.
We have an ideologue.
Lots of people have put in.
We have an ideologue as a planning
Lots
regulator.
of people have put in planning permissions. Why would you go through the expense of all of that? If you didn't think it was viable from day one. I'm not saying there's not issues around viability around apartment blocks and apartment buildings and so on, and density, and we're prepared to examine all of that. But there comes a stage. I mean, there's enormous amounts of zoning in the country, and planning permissions have been granted, and in some, but a lot of other people are building. Please. Other people are building, and so on. So.
Deputy Michael.